Welcome to this segment of Your Opportunity Partner. My name is Professor Art Gogatz. I'm your host for this channel. And today we're going to talk about opportunities and the unknown. Now, this is a topic that is really important within opportunities because most of us, sometimes we see opportunities, but that doesn't mean we do anything about it. That doesn't mean we really act on it. And so the unknown is always a factor. We're okay with what we're used to, what we're comfortable with, what's in our comfort zone. When we go into something else, it becomes more of a problem. Now, before we begin, please, if you like this episode, if you find some of the things we talk about on this channel in terms of opportunity interesting, please like and subscribe to the channel. It's always important for new channels. This is the 7th episode of the channel. Okay, they did some research and experiments. One of the experiments they did about the unknown was they asked people, okay, imagine your life depended on getting or picking a red ball from a jar. You couldn't see inside the jar. You just had to reach into it. And you had to pick a red ball. Okay. In one jar, you knew the ratio. There were 100 balls in the jar, big jar, an urn, and there were 50 red and 50 black. And you had to get a red one, or you're really in trouble. Okay. In the other jar, because they had 2 jars, you could choose one or the other, but you only could take one ball out of either jar. So in one jar, you had the ratio of 50 red and 50 black. In the other jar, you had at least one red and at least one black, but you didn't know the color of the other 98 balls. They could be any color. They could all be red. They could all be black. You don't know. Now, when they ask people, okay, this is really serious, you're going to be in trouble completely, maybe even lose your life if you choose a black ball. In order to get the red one, which jar are you going to pick from? Almost everybody said the 50-50 one. Why? Because you know at least you have a 50-50 chance. The other one, maybe you have 10% chance, but maybe you have a 90% chance. You don't know. So it actually comes out to it doesn't matter. But yet people will always say, no, I don't want to know. I don't want to go with the unknown. I want to go with at least the one where I know the percentages. Now, they ask a follow-up question to this research, and they say, would you let a stranger decide which of the 2 jars to pick from for you? And people say, no. You wouldn't let a stranger have that decision. So what does this mean? Even though in this case with the red ball, it didn't really matter which jar you picked from, it did to most people. They are afraid of the unknown. And it's very similar to the episode we did on change, which means that change scares people. Why? Because change brings you the unknown. You're not sure what's going to happen. When we look at business for centuries is based upon certainty, security. We want to know what's going to happen. Business, they talk about just-in-time manufacturing, which means You have to know what the demand is going to be. Then you have to manufacture just enough, because if you manufacture too much, you'll have an inventory left over and you won't be able to sell it. And that's not really very good. And if you don't manufacture enough, well, then you'll have a demand, but you won't be able to fulfill it. And that won't be very good either. So business needs to know what's going to happen. Even when they talk about, when you look at the world today and they talk about the stock market, they say, well, stock market's okay if they know. What they don't like is uncertainty. And what we have today in the world is much more uncertainty than we had before. But most people are not really just good at that. They still want to know what's going to happen. When I teach, sometimes I hold out my hand to somebody in class. I say, take my hand, let's go. Now, these are my own students. They know me already. It's not like a stranger. I say, take my hand, let's go. Student always says, Professor, where are we going? And most don't take my hand. They want to know what they have to do. Often when I teach, almost all the time, I ask for a volunteer for an exercise, especially when I'm teaching creativity innovation where we do exercises. So I ask for a volunteer. And very few students volunteer. Well, children, of course, if you teach children, they all volunteer. But adults, I did some training not too long ago, big group, asked for a volunteer. I think out of 100 people, 2 volunteered, maybe 3. That's not very many. Why? People don't want to volunteer. Well, one of the very important learning points in this is if you want an opportunity, you don't know what the results of that opportunity will bring to you. It may be wonderful. It may not be, but that's something you don't know going in. You can get all the information. I mean, business, go back to business. Jeff Bezos, former CEO of Amazon, has been quoted as saying the average CEO today makes a decision with, at best, 50% data. It used to be business would try to get 80%, but now, as Bezos points out, there's no time for that. Time is compressed now. Things are happening faster and faster, and there's more and more information. So you're never really dealing with security anymore. Yet that's exactly what people want. They want to know, if I do this, what's going to happen? If I don't do this, what's going to happen? And they're not really interested in an opportunity because they're looking for certainty. Well, if we had certainty, it would be easier. This is the whole basis of decision making. Most people don't like to make a decision until they're sure. Well, as I said, it used to be easier. Today, it's much more difficult. Why? Because you don't have time to make the decision. And there's more and more data to look at that you don't have time to look at. A lot of that data is not true either. It's false information. So it becomes much more difficult today to be in security. One of the books, when I teach creativity, that I recommend is a children's book. Name of the book is Alice in Wonderland, written by Lewis Carroll. Carroll, by the way, was an interesting guy. He was a mathematician and a logician, which means he wrote books on logic. And he wrote a fantasy of a girl who goes into a parallel universe. Now, the interesting part first off, the book is about creativity. It's about the passage of a child through adolescence to become an adult, because there are two books, Alice in Wonderland, Alice Through the Looking Glass. But the beginning of Alice in Wonderland, the scene is interesting. Alice is sitting with her sister's older, and they're sitting out in the countryside in England in summer, and they're reading a book. Alice is bored. She says to herself, there's no pictures in this book. So she's bored. She sees a rabbit. Okay. Now, if you were out in the countryside in England in the summer, could you see a rabbit? Yeah, maybe. Okay. But this rabbit that she sees has clothes and a watch. And she says, "Oh, I've never seen a rabbit with clothes and a watch before." So she follows the rabbit. Well, what does the rabbit do? It goes down into a tunnel, because rabbits live underground for protection. So it goes down in a tunnel, a hole in the ground. And what happens? Well, imagine if you were out in the countryside today, you saw a rabbit, it went down into a hole in the ground. What would you do? Nothing. Nothing. What did Alice do? Staying into the hole or the tunnel after the rabbit without even thinking, just boom. And what happened? She fell into Wonderland. But what's the message? Message is, if you want to go to Wonderland, don't ask where are we going and what's going to happen once we get there. Which means same thing, because the parallel to opportunity from that book of Alice in Wonderland and the opening scene is very clear. If you want to really take advantage of an opportunity, don't worry about what will happen if I do. Somebody offers you a job. It's in another country. You've never been to that country. You're not sure you're going to be able to function well there, the language, the culture, the being alone, but it's an opportunity. How about a promotion? How about a different job? How about more responsibility? You don't know. You have to trust the opportunity, the chance, the experience, the learning, and you have to trust yourself. Most people refuse or ignore, I would say ignore, the opportunities that they have. Why? They don't trust themselves. They don't have enough confidence. Now, we'll talk about confidence in an episode later on. But this is, again, goes back to, imagine you're in a room and it's totally dark. And there are a lot of things in the room, but you don't really see them, but you bump into them. What you do, you try to avoid things. No, the whole idea is to try to see them, to know what they are. Most of our opportunities, they're there for us to take advantage of. We don't want to see them. We don't want to try. We avoid them. We ignore them. We pretend they're not there. We know a lot more than what we consciously accept. So most of our opportunities are not because we're ignorant, but because we're fearful or mistrustful, and we stay with what we know. Now, only way really to find an opportunity is to take the hand of the opportunity. Remember I said I hold out my hand to my students and say, here, take my hand, let's go. If you do that with an opportunity, then you'll be fine. Maybe not every time, but you need to go with what you want. And it's important to have the mindset of, I'm going to help myself. I'm going to try. I'm going to take a chance on this. You do that when you meet a person. You get involved with them. You take a chance on them. Yeah, you get to know them, but it's still you don't know. Waking up in the morning and getting out of bed and doing things, this is already taking a chance. The unknown is every day. What's known? Stay home, stay in bed. As soon as you go out, you're taking a bit of a risk with the unknown. So basically, again, do you want safe adventure? We talked in the last segment. Children, they get up in the morning and they look for, oh, what's going to be exciting today? What's the adventure? And adults say, well, what's the problem? You can recognize and embrace and go with most of your opportunities. Instead of just saying, no, I'll stay with what I have because I know what it is. One of the last things I'll say on this segment before we move on, one of the phrases that I find limiting, you know what the phrase is? You know, the statement is, better than nothing. That means this is not good, this is not great, but at least it's okay. Opportunity brings you better than okay, but you have to be willing to go with it. You can't just say, okay, I'll be okay with that. Thank you very much for today. Again, this is not Christmas. Santa Claus is behind me, but Santa Claus is not really a strategy. It's a hope. And as we always say, hope is not a strategy. Take care. See you again in the next episode. Thank you.